Admittedly, I did not start off this one by eating cheese. I didn't even eat cheese between this one and the last one. But I was talking in the last one about the kind of realization that people are people. And that sounds stupid, and it's, I guess, almost in a contrived way intended to. But the absurdity for me when I was in high school was that I held teachers to a higher standard than I held my peers. I held adults to a higher standard than I held myself and my peers. I just thought they were perfect in some ways. And it wasn't like a literal, like, wow, they must be so perfect. It was more of an implicit assumption that I had made as a kid, and I think a lot of kids do, but I can't necessarily generalize, so I'll talk about my own experience, and we're going to assume that it only applies to me. But if it happens to apply to someone else or they relate, then cool, and I can speak to that. But for now, assume that this is what applied to me. In my particular case, I assumed that people were generally kind of perfect if they were above me in some way. If they were a teacher, if they were some form of staff member I knew, if they were some form of adult, really. And this is kind of a silly thought now because I had in front of me lots of examples of adults who were not perfect, of criminals who were not perfect. And it was very easy to judge criminals in particular. I thought, well, how could you break the law? The law is there and it's obvious. You should be able to follow it. And, maybe you don't know, but as a kid, I was particularly fond of non-nuanced and very, this way and this way arguments. And I say this way, in that black and white, right? I was very much polarizing in how I thought, or my thoughts polarized me, where I felt, it was either obvious that you should be one way or obvious that you should be the other way. And there wasn't necessarily an in-between. Or if there were multiple choices, it was very obvious which of those choices it was. There was no blending happening. And so I had a few experiences, such as the way of life, and I had a lot of teachers in my life, and I would like to think that I have almost all teachers in my life, in some weird, sappy, almost disgustingly inspirational, contrived inspirational sounding sentence, that everyone can teach something. And that sounds silly. I think it's absurd in a way. It's the sentence that everyone can teach me something is kind of foolish in the sense that it almost just assumes that everyone's going to do something good, and I don't think that that's the case. It just sounds like it does. I think it sounds foolish. I think that sentence, that everyone can teach me something, even if you don't say it like that, if you say, like, everyone has something to teach me, I still think it has a tinge of foolishness to it, of naivety. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think I would like to hold on to that. Because I do believe for some inarticulable, for some reason I can't articulate, I want to cling to that idea, that everyone can teach me something. And if that is pure naivety and it will go away, so be it. But until that moment, I'm going to hang on to that, because I think that it has some merit, where you can learn quite a bit from everyone around you, and if you aren't doing that, then maybe you could try. And that sounded like advice, but it's mostly me talking to myself, right? And so if you happen to hear that and it resonates with you, that's awesome. But know that if it doesn't resonate with you, well, that's cool too. It's just the way that I chose to articulate it that happened to work for myself as well. And also, for those of you concerned that I'm tripping over my own toes here, or taking great pains to be clear that I am not, impressing my opinion on someone else or anything like that, it's not quite that simple or meaningless, right? I'm not sitting here trying to be PC. I'm not particularly PC. I'm trying to very clearly articulate my thoughts. And I've found that sometimes using long sentences can be fun in a way, especially sentences that interrupt each other and then you continue later. It's something that I'm playing with for the sake of myself and not for anyone else's sake. I think that it can be misconstrued frequently and usually is, but I'm not particularly bothered by that. I think that being aware of it is important, but when you're doing it on purpose, well, you should be ready to face the consequences, such as people thinking that you're trying to sound smart. I am by no means trying to sound smart. If I was trying to sound smart, I think I would sound much, much dumber. But the thing is that I am trying to articulate very clearly what assumptions I'm making and what statements I'm actually trying to make. I'm trying to clearly get across to people what I'm trying to say, while also pointing out some of the assumptions that they might be making as I make them. And so this video ended up turning into kind of a let me explain, to a degree, why I sound the way I do. And I think that that sound will change as I learn what things work for me and what things don't. And if you are so inclined, you're welcome to see that process happen. But if you are not so inclined, then you're welcome to not see that process happen. It's kind of up to you, and I don't particularly care. And that's not an insulting statement. That is a statement of it's your life and you get to pick what you want to do with it. And so I don't really have much bearing on it. And my not caring is not so much that I don't care about you or the nameless individual that is supposedly seated in front of me, but rather that I don't care, I guess, so much whether or not you want to be invested in what I'm doing and experimenting with in my life. So I promise the next video will be about some of the disillusionment I had when I was a youngster, and I say that intentionally kind of sillily because I'm still quite young and still learning lots.